Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, an HOA messed with my grandpa and claimed that they owned a part of his property. They then destroyed his barn illegally while he was in the hospital. Here is what happened, let's dive right into the story. I don't think people realize how much of the population out here work on or own farms. I can excuse people from other countries not knowing or understanding why this is such an important industry here. For locals though that seem to not only lack understanding but also lack care, I find them abhorrent. One of these people are the local HOA president who tried to take advantage of my grandfather. The layout of my grandpa's farm is a little weird, especially when people see where his barn is located. For a little bit of context, about 5 years before the events of this story, he had a barn fire. The only place to build the new one was close to the edge of his property, which was also near the property of the HOA president. Right away, he was giving him a hard time about the barn placement and trying to claim the HOA had some stake in the ownership. It seemed like all empty talk and things that didn't make any sense at all, claiming that new laws made it so barns built after a certain year all had HOA part ownership because they allowed it to get built. I wanted to say something for years, but when Grandpa asks me not to do something, I respect that. I knew he could handle things on his own, and if he needed help I would be waiting on the sidelines. Fast forward 5 years and the barn is doing great, and the HOA seemed to have backed off a little bit. My grandpa at this point was starting to have his age catch up with him and was urged by the family to not do any hard work, to let us and hired help handle the farm and let him rest in his old age. Well, my grandpa is about as stubborn as the bulls on the farm. He didn't listen to any of us and one day fell off a tractor. If you are young, you might think that fall would not be a big deal and you can just stand up and shake it off. For an older person though, every kind of fall is dangerous, and with this one, he ended up in the hospital. He broke a couple of bones, but they kept him because something on his head scan worried them. The entire time he was telling the family he was fine and just wanted to come back home and keep working on the farm. We somehow convinced him to listen to the doctors and stay in the hospital. With my grandpa off of the farm, it was the HOA president's time to strike. They moved in one day when nobody else was around and destroyed the barn. They took all the animals and sold them off for personal profit before having the entire barn torn down. We found out about this first and didn't want to hide what was going on from Grandpa. Let me tell you, I have never seen him more angry than when he was hearing that news. We almost could not stop him from leaving against medical advice to give them a piece of his mind. We promised to take care of it and he reluctantly agreed to stay at the hospital. My father and I were in charge of defending him against the HOA and giving the president a piece of our mind. We went to find him and told him flat out that we knew he destroyed the barn and that we were angry about it. He didn't seem to care at all and instead mocked us for not being able to do anything. He said that it was his property and if we were to try and build another barn, he would just tear it down again. Then said he planned to use that space to build a greenhouse and then fence it off to keep us out, warning us that if we tried to pursue this further, he would make sure to destroy more than just our barn. Our family doesn't back down when a bully tries to get in our face with threats. We knew that my grandpa had rights to that barn and land. We spoke to a lawyer and by the time things were getting off the ground, my grandpa was out of the hospital and ready to take a center role in making sure the HOA president would regret messing with him and his barn. He had clear proof of the land division and that while it was close to the edge, the barn was 100% on his farm and legal. He even wanted to try and be nice to settle this entire thing out of court if the HOA president built a new barn and got his animals back. As you can probably guess, he refused, thinking that in court he would just win because he ran the HOA. Somebody should tell this guy that just because you have a small piece of power, that does not mean you are automatically in the right. Honestly, that's something I think a lot of people in power need to keep in mind because it seems to be a pattern. In court, the HOA president was trying to make an argument of the land and the barn belonging to him because it was on his property. When confronted with the fact that we had proof it was on Grandpa's property, he tried to shift it to being an HOA issue. He claimed that when the barn was built, the HOA was firmly established and that meant they had overall ownership of it. The barn was HOA property and they were just allowing Grandpa to use it. When he went into the hospital, he claimed the HOA feared the benefits of the barn had outlived the use to the community as a whole. Therefore, they got rid of it and made sure to get all the animals a new home. When questioned about the money they made from his animals, they said it was going to go towards the next community project for that area of land. They also lied and said that they sent my grandpa a check for his share. Now, my grandpa was not stupid like some people around here assume. He never graduated high school and started working full-time on the farm from the age of 12. He was smart though and knew how to use the HOA's own rulebook against them better than our lawyer even did. The judge was already siding with my grandpa and going to give him back the land and force the HOA to build the barn and replace the animals. He was not going to be satisfied with just that though. He pulled some random bylaw out of their own rules regarding HOAs entering properties or starting a new building project, pointing out that the HOA president never got an appropriate permit or held a vote. He also did not leave enough time for somebody to appeal, and finally he did not have consent to go on my grandpa's farm, and he could not even lie about having it since my grandpa was in the hospital at the time. Now the HOA president was in some serious trouble and facing a bunch of fines both legally and within the HOA itself. My grandpa's loophole gave every single person in the neighborhood the opportunity to file a complaint about their rights not being met. This meant they could all formally appeal to leave the HOA, and boy, did everybody jump on that. The only members left were the people on the board, and they realized that they had just been totally screwed over by an old man with no education. And yeah, ripe stars, as veterans of Reddit, we all know you never mess with a farmer and you never mess with grandmas or grandpas. They will destroy you. Either way, if you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like the video and leave a comment because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much, and the next one is a parking revenge story. There was a douchebag that parked sideways across 4 handicapped spaces, like nobody could park in all 4 of them. It was a huge lifted truck with huge tires. I used to work on bicycles and had my valve core removal tool in my car. So what I did was I unscrewed all 4 of his valve cores and taped them to his windshield. All 4 tires were now flat, and it's unlikely he has that tool on him, so he cannot air them back up because he cannot put the valve cores back in without it. I did not leave a note because he knew what he did. This was before the days of camera phones, or I would have stayed to get his reaction on phone. I parked in an adjacent lot at another store to watch the carnage unfold. First, a cop actually rode by and stopped to put a ticket on his windshield, and then the guy comes out with all his groceries and starts putting them into the truck before it dawns on him that his truck is a few inches shorter. Big rage fit, stomps back inside, probably to have them check their non-existent cameras, comes back out and has another rage fit. Calls tow truck, regular tow truck shows up. He then tells them to leave and go get a flatbed tow truck. Sure, he charged extra for that. Guy's truck is finally loaded up and he angrily gets into the tow truck and they drive off into the sunset. The funny part is that he did not even appear to notice the ticket on his windshield yet, so I'm sure he had another rage fit when he eventually saw it. A couple of people saw me doing it and were like, "I saw nothing," and kept walking. Still, the best piece of petty revenge I've ever dished out. And the next one is a malicious compliance story. About 10 years ago, I worked in a team of scientists when one day our boss told me others perceive me as contemptuous. I was shocked beyond words. I certainly didn't feel superior or feel contempt for anyone. I was so flabbergasted that I was silent for probably 2 solid minutes. I asked for an example of when something I had said or done gave someone that feeling, and he said he could not divulge that information. Okay, then I asked for an example he had experienced or observed himself. He said he had none. I said, since I have no clue what I've done, how am I supposed to adjust my behavior? He said he didn't know. I said, basically then I just need to not talk? He said he was not sure. I knew right then what to do. I'm pretty introverted, and as a child I didn't talk for years. I rarely spoke until I was about 13 years old. I got lots of notes from teachers about how quiet I was. I would answer questions when asked directly, but rarely spoke otherwise. So my malicious compliance in this situation was easy for me. I just stopped talking except when asked a question. I made a point of smiling, showing I was listening, nodding agreement, etc. I was extremely polite and agreeable, and pretty soon some big issues came up that I had specific knowledge about. I knew how to solve them, but no one else asked. A huge conflict came up between 2 of our labs because one group wanted it one way and the other group had a different opinion. They fought and people were having secret meetings in their offices to try to win, and when they finally arrived at the action they chose, it was wrong. In fact, both groups were wrong and the whole experiment failed. It's important to know that no one was hurt, no property damage or anything like that, just a lot of wasted time and expense on materials. But I never said a word. This went on for 3 weeks and the lab's budget had to be revised. They had to cut travel expenses, which I was okay with because I didn't want to travel anyway, so no conferences for anyone. This is a big deal for a lot of researchers because it's how we gain notoriety to be able to get grants, among other things. Finally, a colleague asked me why I had not spoken for so long, why I was so quiet, was something wrong. I explained about being told others perceived me as contemptuous, and she had the same expression I did when I was told. She said she didn't believe anyone had said that about me. I honestly was surprised again because I believed our boss. Then she asked me what I thought about the experiment design and why it was failing. I told her about the solution I believed would work, which was actually surprisingly simple. She recognized it had a good chance of succeeding and then asked me to share the idea at the next department meeting. At that meeting she asked me again in front of everyone and I repeated what I told her. Several people asked why I had not spoken up sooner. I explained I had been given feedback that indicated I caused others to feel uncomfortable. The whole table of colleagues also looked stunned at me. I said I was committed to not causing such bad feelings and could not figure out how to communicate because the feedback did not give me any specific guidance. Everyone looked at the director at that point and he said, "We should not discuss personal issues." Ha! It was my issue, so I said, if anyone here perceives me as contemptuous and said as much to our boss, that's the reason I haven't been talking. If you don't feel that way about me, let me know and I will stop being silent. Someone else said we needed to hold a vote so there wouldn't be any more confusion or talking behind anyone's back. They voted 100% for me to talk normally and that they didn't agree that I was ever contemptuous. That director slowly stopped coming to work month by month after this episode until he was only showing up 1 day a week. Finally, he took a lab position elsewhere and one of my colleagues was promoted to director. The experiment was a success. The next year I got a grant to keep the research going and paid for 2 people to be able to travel to the related conference to present our findings. And the next one is a story from r/am I the a-hole. A young couple, early 20s, moved in across the street from my boyfriend and I a few months ago. They fight constantly. It's always the girlfriend screaming at the guy while he just silently takes care of their kid. Yesterday I was heading to a doctor's appointment and I needed to check if my new insurance card had arrived already. There's a treatment I'm on a waitlist for and I cannot start it until they have a copy of my insurance, which has been a huge headache to work with. I've been waiting for months for this treatment, so it's a pretty big deal that I get my card to them as soon as humanly possible. Before I went to the mailbox, I saw the neighbors in another one of their fights standing right next to the mailboxes. My boyfriend told me to just wait and check the mail after my appointment to avoid getting involved in their drama. He said we can just drop the card off at the clinic later if it had arrived. I did not want to do this because I didn't want to risk delaying things any longer since this is a treatment I really need. Unfortunately, when I went to the mailbox, the girlfriend started berating me about enjoying the show. I told her I didn't care about what's going on with them, I just needed to get the mail and then I went back inside. My boyfriend called me an a-hole for involving myself and kept saying, "I told you so." He thinks it's gonna cause problems with them. Personally, I don't really care because I got my card and their lease is up in a few months anyway. We also have security cameras, so if the girlfriend tried anything, we would have it all on tape. So Reddit, am I the a-hole? Edit, I've talked to the guy about getting him help, however, calling the cops is not an option due to severe racial tensions in our area. He's currently working on moving back home but cannot afford to do so just yet. Comment number 1, not the a-hole, but you could have said that you weren't really enjoying it because it's a rerun from last week and that she should get some fresh content. Comment number 2, not the a-hole, she was in public, what was she expecting? That you would walk blindfolded to your mailbox? You're just living your life. If she doesn't want to be a crap show for everyone to see, she can start therapy. Comment number 3, not the a-hole, I don't care if you needed that card or just wanted to get your mail. They chose to argue in public, that's just trashy, and blocking the mailboxes for others makes them a-holes. Also, your boyfriend is a bit of an a-hole and way too concerned about what other people think instead of what is important. Neighbor repeatedly trespassed and trimmed my bushes at the edge of the property line. I knew that I was going to have to write a story about my neighbor at one point, the only thing I did not know was when and why. To put it very bluntly, my neighbor is crazy and terrorizes everyone else that lives near him. The part where it hits the gray area is that I'm not quite sure how much of what he is doing and saying he does on purpose, and how much could be due to some underlying problem. The biggest example of that is trying to figure out the things that he says. Now, some of it are obvious lies, like him saying that he is friends with the Pope and he is close friends with the presidents from many different countries. He also says that squirrels are working for the CIA and he is hired by some random agency to eliminate them and keep government secrets safe. Now, I know on the surface it is clear that none of that stuff is true, I just don't know if he actually considers it true or uses it as an excuse when he gets caught doing things that he shouldn't. The major thing being that it is not uncommon for anyone in the neighborhood to find him wandering around on their properties, sometimes armed with a pellet gun doing God knows what. Obviously, most people call the police, but they don't do much except ask him to please leave their property and go back to his. Since he is just mostly wandering around and not actually doing anything illegal, they don't want to arrest him. I understand that because they probably realize that he is not all there, and I actually think he has some member of his family working on the police force, many know something the rest of us don't. Still, we don't want to see him on our property due to how unstable he actually is. I have seen him use his pellet gun to attack the CIA squirrels, even though he is mainly just shooting at empty air. Everyone's main concern was that he was accidentally going to hurt someone or do something like break a window in his crazy shooting spree. He never actually did any damage until one day when he was in my front yard. I did not actually see him at first, but when I did and realized what he was doing, I called the police immediately. I knew that for normal trespassing, they were not going to do anything, but he had hedge cutters and was trimming the bush in front of my property. I have no idea what he was thinking, but I was scared to approach him because of him having something sharp. Now, I'll admit the bush was not anything special, but it was mine and he was absolutely ruining it. I guess he felt there was something wrong with the flowers that grew on it, because he managed to cut off about 90% of them before the police got there, and I felt comfortable enough going outside. Despite being totally crazy, he was aware enough to put the shears down when the police showed up. They asked me what the problem was and I explained to them, only for them to try and give me an answer to let the neighbor get away with it. Officer, so we actually cannot do anything about this, because he was not actually on your property or destroying it. Me, you saw him destroying the bush. There are cut flowers all around it. Officer, we know that he did that to the bush. It is not actually your property though. Me, I don't understand. So you know he did it, but you are saying that my front yard is not my property? Officer, the first 10 feet are actually town property, so he was not technically trespassing. He might have just been keeping the bush out of the road. Me, the bush was not in the road. Can you please just tell him to go back to his own home? I don't feel safe with him having the shears and being so close to my house. They finally agreed to at least do that, and neighbor walks back over to his house. I still did not like what he did and looked up different ways that I could try and stop it from happening again. I was able to get a specific kind of restraining order against him where we could still both live on the block, but he was not allowed to go on my property or within 20 feet near it. So it was enough to keep him from that area in front that apparently does not belong to me. The problem was though that getting him to follow it becomes a bit of a problem. I have called the police multiple times because he was in violation of the restraining order, and once he was even right up at my window. They still won't do anything though, and they just ask him to go back to his own house, which does the trick eventually. My restraining order seemed to have a domino effect though, where more and more people were getting it against him. The big result from this was finally the police having to do something, since they were getting almost daily calls about him breaking restraining orders, and his family connection must have not been strong enough to stop it. He never actually gets in trouble, the police just take him away for a while and return him back to his house after a few hours. Still, it was better than it was before, and he seems to be slowly learning that he cannot just wander around and trespass constantly, because he is actually going to get into trouble one of these days. I know it is not the most satisfying ending for some of you, but at the same time we really don't know what is going through his head. I personally think that whoever is helping him stay out of trouble with the police should be taking steps to help him in the long run. He has not been caught trespassing for weeks now and instead is just on his own property with his pellet gun, shooting at invisible squirrels and muttering to himself how he needs to keep the whole area secure for when the head of the FBI comes for his visit. I feel really bad for Neighbor and I hope that one day he gets the help that he clearly needs, but I will say I'm happier and feel safer with him staying out of everyone's property and destroying things. He is basically an outsider to the neighborhood more than ever, as nobody wants anything to do with him. I know that some people have tried going to his house and being friendly with him, only to be met with the pellet gun pointed at their face and being told to get the hell away from him. Nobody else was in a rush to try and mend fences after that, and we are just waiting and seeing what will happen with the neighbor next. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.